Have a look at the numbers now, and as usual we'll put up the last few numbers, and we've had some huge deficits over the last few years. Back from 17-18, 30 billion, which forecast 10 billion actual, but this last 2 years we've seen surpluses, and last year the original budget numbers had a 4 billion surplus, but when they finished the accounts off at the end of the year, that had improved to an incredible $22 billion. Now a large portion of that came from the fact that the government took away the low to middle income tax offset, which got them a fortune of about $10–11 billion of additional, less cost and additional revenue. And therefore, to turn a $22 billion surplus is amazing. Now they had forecast a $13 billion deficit this financial year in last year's budget, as you can see there. But they came in with a $9 billion surplus. And that again is amazing. 2 consecutive surpluses, the first time in 20 odd years that we've achieved that. And then we've gone now and seen that that's apparently an apparition. We were expecting a $44 billion deficit, so they've turned around 50 billion, but that's not going to stay apparently, because next year we're going back to deficits with about a $28 billion deficit. So somehow or another, we're losing that momentum, we're losing that economic power. Now a large chunk of that is going to go in the tax reductions that have just been announced, but they've been legislated for many years, so people knew they were coming. So we'll have a look at that. But where this year's surplus came from was a phenomenal growth in revenue to $692 billion. 14% up from the previous year's $607 billion, and way up on the estimated budget last year of $668. So that revenue machine that the Australian government has created through both sides of politics is now enormous. And of course what's fueling that significantly is population growth. And we're in the middle of a population surge of new people coming to Australia, but they're educated and they're affluent and they're all taxpayers. And that's a secret weapon Australia has over any other place in the world. We now have more and more taxpayers, more and more high-paying taxpayers than ever before, and that's why these revenue streams are going off the charts. Now we'll see the budget next year, the revenue is going to be a minor increase, only about 0.8%. Very, very small in the scheme of it, particularly when you consider the revenue rises we've had. That again is largely to the result of the new tax cuts coming in, what they call stage 3 tax cuts, which were legislated a few years ago by the Liberal Party. So that revenue is allegedly going to plateau, but I'm not convinced it will. I think you're going to still see some pretty good revenue growth next year as well. And then we're seeing, looking forward on the numbers, expenditure now getting out to crazy numbers of about $726 billion of expenditure. So that's the real challenge in Australia right now. The revenue is not the problem. It's can we stop spending it? Now this government loves to give it out, loves to push it out there, particularly on social programs. And Australia is not giving them a hard time about that. Everyone seems to be saying, oh, help the people more, help the people more. The population growth and all the rest of it have all been pretty solid. The GDP has softened off a little bit. Unemployment rate has bottomed out at 4 and is expected to creep up. And CPI is allegedly down at the happy range at about 3.5. So we'll see what happens there. They think that's going to continue to soften. And if that does, there's hope that it may lead to a reduction in interest rates. So we'll just see what happens there. If you look at what's going on forward past next year's budget, revenue is predicted to continue to rise to $760 billion. So we're only going to have one small year of slow increment, and then it starts escalating again to $760 and then $800 billion. And when you look back to 2017-18, that's almost double. So it's gone from 446 revenue to 800 billion forecast. That's phenomenal. And I'll be surprised if it hasn't pushed past that by the time it comes along. But as you can see, what comes in must go out apparently in terms of a government, and expenditure has escalated sharply too. It's gone from 450 and heading towards $826 billion in 27-28. As a result, we've got future deficits. Not only do we go from 2 lovely surpluses in next year's deficit, but we've got deficits now for the next foreseeable future, which is baffling to me. if you've got the government back into a good stead financially, where you're making surpluses, you're fixing everything, and you're still delivering services, do we really need to go and push that hard to go back into deficit when we could be banking the money at this stage? 2 years of this surplus is probably not enough, but again, it's ideology, and they've got the controls, they've got the checkbook, and by golly, they're implementing their ideology. Debt is now quite moderate compared to what it was meant to be. Our net debt's sitting at just under $500 billion, and it is going to grow because of those deficits to 660, but that's about where it was meant to be, even when all the adjustments. So all the savings, all of the adjustments, all the windfall of revenue, all amounts to very little, because we're going to end up in the same place as they expected to anyways in a couple of years' time. Doesn't really make sense to me, but it's good to know that we've got that powerful revenue stream, largely funded by salary paying people, increasing every year with the migration, and then the commodities and the corporate environment is also helping that significantly.